Good evening. I have a story to tell you about my sons. Teenagers can be difficult, taking risks, ignoring parental advice. Like my two youngest boys, Jake and Roland, ignoring our advice to just say no to drugs. They were already trying them, unbeknown to us. There were lots of official scary warnings around at that time against drugs. But at the same time, my boys could see their peers enjoying drugs with few problems. So why should they believe the warnings? Factual information and harm reduction advice would have been much better. Cannabis, amphetamines, and magic mushrooms were readily available to Jake, Roland, and their friends because of the illegality. Most of their friends remained in the 90% for whom drugs aren't problematical. But my boys became part of the other 10%. They didn't know they would become addicted to heroin. I'm sure my sons wouldn't have started into drugs when they did, or been drawn further in, if drugs had been licensed to be safely manufactured and responsibly sold or prescribed, instead of being made and sold by organized crime. Our local paper reported Jake's arrest for possession of cannabis, and I was humiliated. He felt shamed and labeled and pushed on a downward path. A fine and a criminal record were not helpful, and he felt further alienated from authority. I believe criminalizing young people for possession of a small quantity of drugs doesn't deter them and makes matters worse. It's the marketing strategy of organized crime to persuade customers into harder drugs. I believe this happened to my sons. So then they were in debt and scared of dealers. I was myself frightened by one of Jake's acquaintances who threatened that my windows might get broken if I didn't pay Jake's debt. I wanted to call the police, but I paid. I was too afraid of alerting the law to Jake's drug use. We loved Roland and Jake, but my husband and I endured many years of unhappiness because of their behavior, and it made life difficult for their studious older brother. Roland, our youngest, shy, gentle son, died nearly 15 years ago, aged 23. He'd given up heroin for a while, until he and his girlfriend split up, and then heroin helped him deal with his heartbreak. But later, Roland decided to make up for wasted years and go to college. So he went on a methadone waiting list. If only this help had been available immediately. After 6 weeks of waiting, while he tried to reduce his use, a friend tempted him out to his house. He died there from heroin and alcohol. When Roland was slumped in the bathroom there, with no naloxone available in those days, the others there delayed calling 999, probably through fear of the law. An unnecessary fear if drug use had been treated only as a health issue. When Roland had said the methadone program depended on him first reducing his heroin use, I was desperate to help him. I would pay for the minimum he needed, and he'd hand it straight to me. I then gave it him at intervals. I was nervous about the law, but I felt calmer having some control. After Roland died, The police seemed sympathetic, but they said I'd be formally questioned. So, while I was grieving for Roland, I worried for 6 months until the interview at the police station. The decision was then made not to pursue it. I wouldn't have been put through this if drug use were not treated as criminal. Jake was away at university when Roland died. They'd been very close. Instead of taking his brother's death as a warning, he dropped out of university and coped with his distress by more drug use. Jake eventually had almost 7 drug-free years. We were proud of him. He was about to qualify as an art psychotherapist, finishing the dissertation for his master's degree, and was in a loving relationship with his partner and baby son. But he relapsed. In 2014, aged 37, with a bright future, he died alone from heroin overdose. I wish he could have gone to an easily accessible clinic for safe prescribed heroin, with counselling and help. Instead, his only option was street heroin of unknown purity and strength. When my grandchildren are older, I'd prefer them not to use drugs. But if they do, I want it to be without going to unsafe environments, without risking a criminal record or worse, without their families feeling fear and shame, and with truthful drugs education, and by choosing safely produced and labelled products from regulated outlets. That's why I joined Anyone's Child. The increasing number of families in our organisation know the misery caused by our drug laws. In the UK, there are now around 70 drug-related deaths per week, the highest number since records began in the early 1990s. If our drug laws are intended to keep people safe, this shows they don't work. I hope we can influence policy to prevent other parents having to hear the worst news any parent can hear, the thing most parents don't even want to think about, the tears and the grief of having to arrange their child's funeral. That's why I want legal regulation of drugs.